On a quiet, rainy morning, a little girl is walking to school. Suddenly, her path is blocked. A pair of dirty, bare feet standing in front of her. A disheveled man, with the stale smell of alcohol on his breath. Instinct tells her something is wrong. So one glances sideways, towards safety. Her school is less than 100 meters away. So close, yet a world away.
가는구나. 우산에 예쁜 거 썼네. 아저씨 우산 좀 씌워줄래?
그게 학교에 꽂아서.
So one looks back. The road behind her is completely empty. There is no one to see, no one to help. And in the silent moments that followed, an act of such profound and unimaginable cruelty would take place. The next time we see her, battered and broken, she is a survivor. In a final, defiant act of will, she uses her last ounce of strength to call for help. And soon after, the worst call a parent can ever receive comes. One to her mother, and one to her father. Their daughter has been found, and she is being rushed to the hospital. So one's parents arrive at the hospital, running into a whirlwind of urgent, clinical voices. The doctor's words are a blur of information her mind refuses to accept. She stumbles to her daughter's bedside, and the sight of her little girl completely shatters her world. As her daughter is wheeled away for emergency surgery, she is left alone in the hallway, powerless, and in the deafening silence of the empty hallway. She feels the first cold tendrils of guilt begin to wrap around her heart.
내가 그리로 가라 했는데 비도 오는 하루로
Her father stands by, lost, unable to offer his wife a single word of comfort. And then, a nurse's urgent voice cuts through their grief. And in that instant, a quiet, protective instinct takes over. He knows somehow that this next blow is his to bear alone. He tells his wife to wait outside. He walks into the room to face the doctor, bracing himself for the words that are about to redefine his entire world. The doctor's explanation is a blur of medical terms, but the final devastating prognosis is clear. The damage is permanent. His daughter will carry a physical reminder of this day for the rest of her life. He barely has time to process the news before she is out of surgery. It was a success. She is stable. Entering her room, he sits beside her and quietly takes her small hand in his.
아빠야, 엄마.
그래.
엄마야는?
엄마는 아빠랑 교대하고 밖에 있다. 계속 밖에 있을 거니까 걱정하지 마라. 의사 선생님이 우리 수원이 괜찮다고 하시네.
아빠야, 잘 갔네.
회사? 벌써 갔다 왔지?
엄마야, 아빠야. 밥도 팔고, 아픈 사람도 잡아야 될 것 같아. 배도 많이 다친 것 같아서 그냥 112로 전화했다.
잘했다. 누구 닮아 이리 똑똑하나?
주황색 파스과 주머니 많이 달린 척도 있고
여기 뭔데?
나쁜 아저씨 잡아야만
수원아, 그런 거는 나중에 이야기하자. 알았지?
학교 쪽으로 갔는데 자꾸 차가 와서 잊어버릴 것 같아서.
걔한테 경찰 아저씨랑 만났는데 거의 다 잡았다더라.
진짜?
그래. 한숨 자고 일어나면 아빠랑 경찰 아저씨랑 꼭 잡아놓을 거니까 우리 수원이 한숨 자자.
그러면 그럴까? 자꾸 목이 말라서 자꾸 똥도 나올 것 같고.
Watching his daughter try to be brave, her small, quiet strength, it isn't a comfort. It is a weight, one that suddenly becomes too heavy to carry. The air in the room turns thick and unbreathable. He feels the walls of his own composure begin to crack and buckle from within. Before the dam breaks completely, he stumbles out into the hallway. Just then, the police call with an update. They have a match. The suspect is a man with a prior record, and they know where he lives. This is the news he's been waiting for. But his surge of hope is immediately crushed by a wall of procedure. There's no warrant. Not enough hard evidence yet. The police tell him their hands are tied. They cannot make an arrest, unless the victim herself can identify him. At that moment, So-won's father remembered something she had once said. It was a small but important detail that could identify the suspect. He knew what this meant. A terrible choice now lay before them. They had to decide whether to allow their child to be questioned by the police. To catch the monster, they might have to risk re-traumatizing their daughter.
조사를 받으라고.
조사가 아니고 진술이다.
조사고 진술이고 네 새끼다. 아가 그 끔찍한 일 다시 떠올리게 하는 게 그게 키우는 아빠가 할 일이가. 아빠가 돼가지고 언니는 감정도 없나?
Faced with his wife's fierce, protective rage, the father is silenced, defeated. He has no answers, no solutions. And then, the officer says something unexpected. He doesn't offer another procedure, another rule. Instead, he offers a name, the Sunflower Center, a place with a psychologist who specializes in helping children through the darkest of traumas.
우리 아가 와 저런 일을 당했는데 전부터 경찰들이 그런 놈들 관리를 잘했어 보이소. 이런 일이 와 생깁니까?
좀 앉아라. 그래부터 잡아야 될 거 아이가?
두 분 우선 진정하시고요. 지금 진정하게 됐어요.
In her mind, she is no longer in the hospital. She is back on that rainy morning, reliving every small decision. It's a quiet, private torture, a suffocating litany of what-ifs and if-onlys. If only I had walked her to school. One simple, everyday choice, now replayed in her mind over and over as the moment that could have changed everything. The parents' heated argument is interrupted by an officer. He tells the father to go home and bring back some of his daughter's favorite toys. The psychologist will need them. And so he returns to a house that no longer feels like home. He walks into his daughter's room, a colorful, innocent world now frozen in time. And there, sitting on her bed, is her favorite cartoon character, a silly, smiling monkey named Kokomong. The next day, the therapy begins. The psychologist explains that So-won's mind is still incredibly fragile, but her father has made a promise, and he intends to keep it. Under the watchful eye of a camera, the session starts. At first, there is nothing. So-won refuses to even open her eyes, but then, The psychologist mentions that one familiar, comforting name. Her eyes finally flutter open. It's the first tiny breakthrough, a single crack of light in the overwhelming darkness.
나는 소시지 콧구멍 장난꾸러기 콧구멍 아줌마 이쁘지?
She opens up, slowly, timidly at first, then finding comfort in the psychologist's gentle presence. When she is finally asked the one question everyone has been dreading, if she can look at photos of suspects, she looks at her parents, and with a quiet strength that breaks their hearts, she agrees. A series of photographs are placed before her, and then she sees him. The shift in her is instant. Her small body recoils. The calm vanishes, replaced by a raw, visible pain. The psychologist, knowing she has her answer, gently asks how she is so sure. But So-won can no longer speak. She simply points her small, trembling finger, confirming the face from her nightmares. Later, the psychologist delivers the hard truth to her parents. So-won has given them what they needed, but it has come at a great cost. The trauma to her young mind is severe. The psychologist warns them that the road ahead will be long, that the trauma may manifest in unpredictable ways, nightmares, withdrawal, that their entire family may need help to heal. But for the mother, this is too much. It feels like a diagnosis without hope, a business transaction. In a moment of fierce denial, she refuses the doctor's help. And while the family is placed in a crowded, impersonal hospital ward, news arrives from the police. The culprit has been arrested. The father rushes to the police station, needing to see the face of the man who destroyed their lives. But before he can even get inside, he's ambushed, swarmed, not by officers, but by a pack of media cameras, flashing in his face, turning his private agony into a public spectacle. The story explodes. The family's private tragedy is now public news, and with it, the name of their hospital. Sensing the approaching disaster, the father rushes back. But it's too late. The reporters are already there, a feeding frenzy. What follows is a frantic escape through their own hospital. The father cradles So-won, running up flight after flight of stairs to find safety. Behind them, his pregnant wife desperately tries to hold back the relentless tide of cameras. They finally reach a private room, but the chaos of the escape has triggered a terrible, humiliating consequence of her permanent injuries. Seeing her daughter's profound distress, the mother panics and rushes out to find a doctor. But the immense stress of the day finally takes its toll on her pregnant body, causing her to collapse in the hallway before So-won can get help. Inside the room, the father is now completely alone with a terrified, crying child. Not knowing what else to do, he acts out of pure, clumsy instinct. Wanting only to fix it, he frantically begins to pull at her clothes, a rough, desperate attempt to clean her. But he is met with a sudden, violent, and absolute resistance from his own daughter.
전화! 움직이지 마라! 움직이지 마라! 옷을 다 묻는다! 전화 가만히 있어봐! 아니야.
He doesn't understand. Not at first. He just freezes, stunned by her violent rejection. But then, as he looks at her terrified eyes, he sees it. She isn't looking at him, her father. She is looking through him, at the ghost of the man who hurt her. And in that single, soul-crushing moment, a truth of unimaginable cruelty reveals itself. His rough, clumsy attempt to help has been twisted by her trauma. His desperate, loving hands have become the hands of the monster. In her terrified mind, he, her father, the one person who is supposed to be her ultimate protector, has become the very thing she fears most. It is a psychological wound so deep, no surgery could ever hope to fix it. A doctor rushes in, breaking the spell, informing him that his wife has just collapsed in the hallway. His daughter is trapped in a waking nightmare. His pregnant wife is unconscious. He stands between their two rooms, a man caught between two different hells, powerless to help either. A father and a husband, completely and utterly broken.
미호아, 어떻게 5개월이나 말 안 했노?
With a heart that had not yet healed, he returned to his daughter's room intending to talk to her. But So-won completely shut herself off from her father.
동생 있었으면 좋겠다 그랬지. 엄마 뱃속에 지금 수원이 동생이 있거든. 네 무슨 말인지 알겠나?
He asks a gentle, pointless question about the heat, anything to break the unbearable silence. But So-won cannot hear his words. She can only hear the voice of her fear, telling her to retreat, to hide. She pulls her Kokomong doll a little closer, seeking comfort from the one person in the room who doesn't frighten her. A wall of silence is her only defense. For her father, that silence is a verdict. It is a quiet, brutal confirmation that the connection between them is broken. And the most loving thing a father can do for a daughter who is terrified of him is to give her what her fear demands. Distance. The culprit is finally brought to court. He claims he remembers nothing. But the evidence against the suspect is absolute. DNA, fingerprints, bloodstains. But he simply claims he was drunk and remembers nothing. Despite the overwhelming proof, his denial creates a procedural roadblock. The judge has no choice but to adjourn. The trial is delayed.
야, 이 개새끼야! 이 개새끼 네가 이게야 임마! 씨발 저기 만들어 놓은 새끼야!
The next day, a little bit of magic appears at the hospital. A giant Kokomong, So-won's favorite character, walks into her room, followed by his friends. And for the first time since the incident, the darkness in her heart seems to lift. A small, genuine smile finally returns to her face. It is, of course, her mother inside the costume. A desperate, heartfelt attempt to reconnect with her daughter. They both watch their daughter, captivated by the costumed characters, and they realize something. This is working. This is the first thing that has brought her real joy. The rental cost is astronomical. They are charged by the hour. But in that moment, the father makes a decision, driven by the priceless sight of his daughter's smile. He asks the owner for a price, not for an hour, but for an entire week.
시간당 말고 하루 대여하는데 얼마입니까?
하루 통으로 대하시면 그 7만 원이고 그러고 일주일 단위로 대하시면 그 35만 원입니다. 예.
그게 좀 싸게는 안 됩니까? 할부라든지 뭐 그런 거는.
할부예?
예.
아, 잠깐만요. 이게 오래됐고 그 색이 없는데 그 저 안 쓰는 거기도 하고 예.
예, 근데요.
그 쓰고 나중에 돌려져 있어.
진짜요?
예, 진짜입니다.
He doesn't charge them a single won. Instead, he goes to the back and brings out an older, well-worn Kokomong suit. A simple, anonymous gift. Another quiet act of kindness from a stranger. A sign that even in their darkest moment, they are not entirely alone. And so, her father puts on a mask to reach his traumatized daughter. He becomes Kokomong. He enters her room, silently, cautiously. He waves, and seeing no rejection in her eyes, he takes a small, hesitant step forward. Their first conversation in days is a silent one, written on a notepad. And for this broken father, it is a hard-won miracle. But as he turns to leave, she gives him a small signal. And then, she opens her arms. And there, hidden beneath the thick, clumsy costume, a father and his daughter finally embrace. They share a small, secret wave goodbye, a secret kept just between them. With this newfound connection, So-won's therapy begins to make progress. Her psychologist gives her a task, a small piece of art to complete. And when the paper is finally filled with butterflies, she will be ready to speak again. Ready to go back to school. It's a promise of healing that leads to a conversation between So-won and the doctor, one that is almost impossible to hear without breaking down.
아, 그래, 맞다. 그럼 소원이 지금 방학이겠네? 계약이 얼마나 남았노, 그라노? 3일. 계약하면 우리 소원이 뭐가 제일 하고 싶은데?
학교에 갈 수 있어요?
그럼.
And then, after weeks of agonizing silence, she finally speaks. The first words she has uttered in what must feel like a lifetime. But they are not words of anger or pain. They are words of shame. Because in her young, innocent mind, the unimaginable cruelty inflicted upon her has somehow become her own fault. She sees it not as a scar inflicted by another, but as a dark, shameful secret that she must now hide from everyone else. The thought of returning to school, of facing her friends, is terrifying. Not because she is afraid of them, but because she is afraid they will see the stain she now believes she carries. The secret that, in her mind, has made her dirty, unworthy. It is the heartbreaking, irrational logic of a trauma so deep, it has begun to poison her own perception of herself.
친구들한테는 말 안 할 거예요.
애들이 알고 있을 것 같나, 모르고 있을 것 같나.
알고 있을 것 같아요.
우리 소원이가 집에 없었던 동안에는 어디 있었다고 할 낀데.
생각해놨는데 엄마 아빠랑 친척집을 갔다 왔다고 그러거나 여행 갔다 왔다고 그러려고요. 설명을 똑똑히 안 하면 나쁜 소문이 날 텐데.
No more shadows we can outlast. Your rough hands move with quiet grace, like shelter I can never trace. A silence deep.
우리 소원이가 이렇게 아파가 제일 속상했던 게 뭐고?
학교 못 간 거 하고 엄마 아빠가 내 때문에 회사도 못 가고 돈도 많이 쓰고.
Your gentle hands remind me how God's power moves so soft somehow. A strength that holds through every trial. Wrapped in mercy, wrapped in quiet smiles. I rest in you, you lead me home. No longer
그 아저씨가 우산을 씌워달라고 했는데 그냥 갈까 그런 마음도 들었는데 비 맞는 아저씨한테는 우산을 씌워주는 게 맞다는 생각이 들어서 그렇게 했는데 사람들이 내 탓이라고 아무도 칭찬해주지도 않고
엄마야 이래. 미안해.
소원이 병원에서 나가가 제일 먼저 하고 싶은 게 뭐고?
학교 가서 친구들 만나는 거 하고 동생 태어나는 거. 근데 학교는 어차피 못 갈 거고 방학 숙제 안 한 것도 마음에 걸리고 동생이 태어나면 안아주고 그래야 되는데 이런 걸 차고 있어서 못 참고 안아줬다가 동생한테 더러운 거 묻힐까봐 걱정도 되고 동생이 너무 이뻐서 엄마야 아빠야가 동생만 이뻐하면 어쩌나 그런 마음도 들고.
So Juan's quiet, heartbreaking wisdom leaves the psychologist speechless. Soon, the day arrives. The day she is finally discharged. The hospital staff have prepared a small, celebratory cake for her, a gesture of hope for her new beginning. But for a child whose trauma is still so raw, home isn't a sanctuary. It's a reminder. She is terrified to go home, terrified of the road she must travel to get there, the same road where her life was shattered. And perhaps most tragically of all, she is still terrified of her own father.
수속 끝났나?
광식이 자 빌리다 놨으니까 이리 가자.
서원아, 아빠야랑 같이 내려갈까?
The drive home is its own special kind of torment. The father, separated from his daughter by a makeshift curtain in his own car, can only watch her terror. The moment their car turns onto that road, So one's breathing becomes ragged with fear. The past is not in the past. For her, it is right here, right now. But when they finally arrive, they are greeted not by empty silence, but by an outpouring of love. The front of their shop is covered in heartfelt messages from her school friends. Inside, the house has been cleaned from top to bottom by their neighbors. A young friend of hers appears at the door, consumed by a child's simple, heartbreaking guilt. I was supposed to walk with her that day. It is the first of many small, quiet acts of kindness that will begin to piece their world back together. Soon, the dreaded day arrives. Her first day back at school. She whispers to her mother a new source of anxiety, a secret shame. The crinkling plastic sound made by the colostomy bag. A sound that, to her, feels as loud as a scream. A sound her father overhears from the other room. On the walk to school, she does everything she can to muffle it. A small girl desperately trying to hide the sound of her own wound. But she isn't walking alone. Unseen, her friends are quietly following, forming a protective bubble around her. And further in the distance, a silent, clumsy guardian angel is also watching. Her father, hidden once again inside the Cocomong suit.
배변 주머니가 빠지거나 새는 일이 생기면 바로 연락 좀 주이소.
예.
그리고 당분간은 가능하면은 남자 선생님들하고는 직접적인 접촉이 없었으면 좀 죄송하게 됐습니다.
아유, 이미 스님들한테 다 주의를 줘놨어. 큰 문제는 없을 겁니다.
그리고 혹시라도 애들이 놀리거나 그러진 않겠지?
아버님께서 뭐 이렇게까지 하시는데 친구들도 다 잘할 겁니다.
다음에는 막 옷 제대로 막 차려입고 다시 인사드려 오겠습니다. 죄송합니다. 신속.
The father does everything a desperate, loving parent can do. He pleads with the teacher. He offers suggestions. Anything to make her transition back into the world a little gentler. That night, he finds a small, clever solution to her fear of the plastic sound. He fills her backpack with candies, so that every step she takes is now accompanied by a cheerful, rattling sound that belongs only to a child. It is an act of quiet, brilliant love. Day after day, he keeps his silent watch. He works, then spends his lunch break dressed in the heavy Kokomong suit, dancing awkwardly from a distance, all for the chance to see a flicker of joy on his daughter's face. And slowly, painstakingly, it begins to work. The cloud of constant fear that has surrounded her finally begins to part. We see a new lightness in her eyes, a hint of a smile, small and fragile at first, but unmistakably hers. But the world of children is one of innocent, sometimes cruel curiosity. Her classmates eventually ask about the strange rattling sound she always makes. And so one, with a newfound fragile confidence, opens her backpack to explain.
그 가방 안에 뭐 들었노? 뭐가 그리 궁금한데? 사탕 하나씩 줄까? 나도 더.
From his hiding spot, her father watches, until he's spotted by one of her friends. The friend asks if the strange, silent mascot is a new friend of hers, and with a sweet, knowing smile, So-won simply nods. But after she parts ways with her friends, she runs back to the clumsy, costumed figure who has been her silent guardian for weeks.
아빠야 할까? 아빠야지. 대답해라. 너 때문에 내가 아빠야를 자꾸 피해서 일하고 있나? 어째? 집에 가자.
After confirming that it was her father, So-won lovingly took her father's hand and led him home. When they arrived, she told him to take off the costume, and as the heavy costume head comes off, the wall between them finally crumbles into dust. A wall built of trauma and misunderstanding, now washed away by sweat and tears. She sees him not as a monster, not as a memory of her pain, but as he truly is, her father, exhausted, devoted. His love so fierce it was willing to hide behind a mask just to be near her. With the gentle touch of a daughter who has finally returned, she wipes the sweat from his face, and in that one small, forgiving gesture, a heart that had been sealed shut for months, finally, truly, opens. just as their world begins to feel whole again, the cold, broken machinery of the justice system grinds back into motion. A summons arrives. This time, So-won herself must testify in court. The father's outrage is immediate. Why? Why put her through that hell again? The answer is a cruel twist of legal logic. The defense is arguing that a traumatized little girl's initial testimony is unreliable. The judge has agreed. They need her to face her attacker. An attacker who, to this day, simply claims he was too drunk to remember a thing. A legal excuse that could reduce his sentence from a lifetime to just a handful of years. The father confronts him directly and is met with the same infuriating, empty-eyed denial, a shield of feigned amnesia against an undeniable crime.
혹시 합의하러 오셨습니까? 합의? 나도 합의할 수 있으면 얼마나 좋습니까? 근데 가진 게 아무것도 없고 최대한 빨리 나가면 그때 벌어서 드리면 모를까? 그게 그렇지 않습니까?
네 거기 갔지? 다 기억나지? 내 딸 알지? 내가 이대로 가만히 있을 것 같더나?
반말하지 마세요. 되바라진 게 누굴 닮았나 했더니 이제 보니 아빠를 닮았네. 현명하게 잘 생각하세요. 내가 언제까지 여기 있을 것 같으세요? 언젠가는 나갑니다. 나오면 어쩌겠냐!
The father now understands. The culprit isn't a man who can't remember. He's a monster who refuses to take responsibility. A new plan begins to form in his mind. That night, he talks to his wife, not about the trial, but about life insurance. His own. Because if the law gives that man a mere handful of years for what he did, he has decided what must happen. When the system fails, he will deliver the justice it won't. He will end that man's life with his own two hands. What he doesn't know is that from her bedroom, his daughter overhears every single word. On the day of the trial, So-won is brought to court, carrying not just the weight of her own testimony, but now the terrifying secret of her father's plan.
소은 양? 여기 왜 온 줄 알아요? 왜 왔어요?
나쁜 아저씨 헐 주러.
병원에 있을 때 경찰 아저씨들이랑 비디오로 뭐 찍은 거 기억나요?
네.
그때 몸이 많이 아팠을 텐데.
네.
근데 다 기억나요? 그날 사진 보고 소원이한테 나쁘게 한 아저씨 찾아내는 거 했었잖아요. 한 번만 더 해줄 수 있어요? 그 아저씨 사진이 나오면 손을 들면 돼요.
The photo of her attacker appears on the screen, and with all the courage in her small body, So-won slowly raises her hand. A silent act that costs her dearly, forcing her to relive the entire nightmare, right there, in front of everyone. The defense attorney immediately seizes on her testimony, confirming the culprit smelled of alcohol. A legal trap. Because when it's his turn to speak, the monster repeats his only defense that he was too drunk. He don't remember. The father's anger burns, but he stays silent. He trusts the system. He trusts the judge. And then, the verdict comes down. Due to the culprit's state of intoxication, the sentence is not life. It is 12 years. A gasp fills the courtroom. The judge dismisses the family's request for compensation, then simply turns and walks away, and the courtroom erupts into chaos.
죽다 살아나라가 여있고 그게 우리하고 내도 여있고 아빠도 있고 역그래 만든 놈도 있고 증거도 있고 지문도 있는데 겨우 12년이라고 해.
정수 가세요.
12년이면 우리 아가 몇 살인지 아십니까? 12년이면 우리 아가 몇 살인지 아십니까?
하루를 또 버텨 돌아올 거라고 믿었어. 눈물로 너를 붙잡았어. 네가 웃으며 다시 올 거란 그 말도 안 되는 약속을 잊지 못해서 버리지 못해서 난 아직 너를 기다려. 끝나지 않은 이야기처럼 너를 기다려. 네가 남긴 사진 네 목소리 지루해도 더 선명해져. 하루가 일년 같아. 없는 이곳에 어디쯤에 울고 있을까. 날 잊은 건 아닐까. 괜찮다는 거짓말 이젠 너무 아파. 돌아올 거라고 믿었어. 눈물로 너를 붙잡았어. 네가 웃으며 다시 올 거란 그 말도 안 되는 약속을 잊지 못해서 버리지 못해서 나 아직 너를 기다려. 끝나지 않은 이야기처럼 너를 기다려. 시간이 다 가져가도 기억은 너 하나뿐이야.
In the end, a new life is born. A little brother. And with him, a fragile new beginning for So-won and for her entire family. Looking back, the journey was carried on the shoulders of giants. On the father, who hid his own broken heart inside a clumsy cartoon costume, building a bridge of silent love across the chasm of his daughter's trauma. And on the mother, whose journey from shattered despair to a quiet, unbreakable shield of protection is a testament to a strength beyond measure. But the true hero of this story is the little girl herself. Her quiet, stubborn courage in the face of unimaginable pain. The slow, fragile return of her smile, a victory more profound than any court verdict. In Korean, her name, So-won, means wish or hope. And in a world that showed her its absolute worst, she somehow chose to live up to her name. Their world was lit by small lamps of kindness, the loyalty of her young friends, the quiet concern of their neighbors, the simple, anonymous gift from the costume shop owner. Tell the story with heart. Tell the story with sincerity. I'm Pixielow, journeying with you so we both may grow. See you in the next video.